Flight Lieutenant James Harrison had always dreamed of first contact, but not like this. His exploration vessel's emergency landing systems screamed as they cut through Zalara's violet atmosphere, the ship's hull groaning under the strain of re-entry. The jungle planet hadn't even been on their star charts, he'd been thrown here by a spatial anomaly that the ship's computers couldn't explain. As the vessel plunged through layers of luminescent clouds, James fought with the controls, his knuckles white against the steering column. "Come on, girl, just a little longer," he muttered through clenched teeth. The ship responded with a series of violent shudders before its emergency thrusters finally engaged, slowing their descent enough for a rough but survivable landing in a clearing surrounded by towering purple-leaf trees. The impact rattled every bone in his body. When the dust settled, James ran a quick systems check. The news wasn't good. The quantum drive was completely dead, and the communication array had been sheared off during re-entry. He was stranded on an unknown world with no way to call for help. James gathered his survival gear and stepped out into the alien air. The humidity hit him like a physical force, and two suns painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The vegetation around him pulsed with bioluminescence, and strange bird-like creatures called from the canopy above. His handheld scanner showed breathable atmosphere, but the readings were otherwise inconclusive about the planet's composition. He had barely begun documenting his surroundings when the first signs of intelligent life appeared. Silent figures emerged from the jungle's edge, their bodies adorned with armor that seemed to be made from both organic materials and some kind of advanced polymer. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, their skin a deep indigo marked with phosphorescent patterns that shifted like northern lights. The beings, whom James would later know as the Kirani, surrounded him with practiced efficiency. Their weapons appeared ceremonial but hummed with barely contained energy. Their leader, a female warrior whose armor bore intricate golden patterns, stepped forward and spoke in a language that sounded like flowing water. James raised his hands slowly. "I come in peace," he said, knowing they wouldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey his peaceful intentions. "My ship was damaged. I need help." The leader studied him with eyes that shimmered like opals. She turned to her companions and spoke rapidly, gesturing at both James and the sky. To his surprise, one of them produced a small device and waved it over him. The device projected holographic symbols that the warriors studied intently. What happened next would change James's life forever. The leader approached him again, this time extending a crystalline object that pulsed with an inner light. Every instinct told him this was important, a test or offering of some kind. Drawing on his diplomatic training, James accepted the crystal with both hands and bowed slightly. The reaction was immediate. The warriors dropped to one knee, their weapons lowered. The leader removed her ceremonial mask, revealing features that were both alien and striking, high cheekbones, luminescent markings that traced patterns across her face, and those impossible opal eyes. She smiled, revealing teeth that gleamed like mother-of-pearl. Two more female warriors stepped forward, removing their masks as well. One had markings that spiraled across her skin like constellations, while the other's phosphorescent patterns pulsed in time with her movements. They flanked their leader, and all three placed their right hands over their hearts in what was clearly a gesture of significance. It wasn't until much later that James learned the truth. The crystal was the heart of selection, a sacred artifact used in their most important ritual. For generations, the Kirani had used it to identify worthy mates for their most elite warriors, women who combined the roles of protector, leader, and keeper of ancient knowledge. The crystal was said to resonate only with those who possessed exceptional qualities of spirit and strength. By accepting the crystal with such instinctive reverence, James had not only participated in their ritual but had been chosen by it. The three warriors, Naira the leader, Vena the strategist, and Cora the mystic, were now bound to him by laws older than their written history. As the sun set and the jungle's bioluminescence intensified, James found himself being led toward a city that seemed to grow from the living trees themselves. Structures of crystal and organic matter spiraled up into the canopy, connected by bridges that looked like solidified light. The other warriors kept their distance, some with obvious respect, others with barely concealed hostility. Naira spoke again, and this time her words were accompanied by gestures toward the city, then to James, then to herself and her companions. The meaning was clear enough: he was being invited into their world. As they walked, James noticed that the crystal he still held was pulsing in rhythm with the patterns on the warrior's skin, creating a harmony he could feel in his bones. What he didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. The Kirani's enemies were watching from the shadows, and James's arrival had set in motion events that had been prophesied since the first of their kind looked up at the stars and dreamed of destiny. For now, though, he followed his new companions into their luminescent city, knowing only that he was farther from home than any human had ever been, and that somehow, against all odds, he had found himself bound to three of the most powerful beings he had ever encountered. The real question was, what would they expect of him now? The first rays of Zalara's twin suns found James standing on a crystalline balcony, trying to make sense of the last 12 hours. The city of the Kirani, Luminara, they called it, sparkled like a living jewel in the morning light. Below him, warrior priests moved through training formations that looked more like deadly dances, their weapons trailing paths of light through the air. Naira appeared beside him with the silent grace that seemed natural to her people. "You slept poorly," she said in heavily accented English. During the night, the Kirani had used some kind of neural technology to begin a basic language transfer. The process had left James with a headache and the ability to understand simple phrases. "There's a lot to process," James replied, watching as she moved to stand beside him. Her indigo skin seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, the luminescent patterns shifting like waves beneath the surface. "I still don't fully understand what happened yesterday." "You were chosen," Vena's voice came from behind them. The strategist warrior moved to James's other side, her constellation-like markings pulsing softly. "The heart of selection has not responded so strongly in many generations." "But why me?" James turned to face them both. "I'm not even from your world." "Perhaps that is why." Cora emerged from the chamber, her mystic's robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. "The old prophecies speak of one who would come from beyond the stars, carrying change in their wake." James was about to respond when a commotion erupted in the training yard below. A group of male warriors, led by a towering figure whose armor bore the marks of many battles, had interrupted the morning exercises. Their body language was aggressive, challenging. "Draken," Naira's voice carried a note of warning. "He leads the traditionalist faction. They believe the heart of selection has been corrupted by your presence." The crowd below parted as Draken strode forward, pointing up at their balcony. His voice boomed across the courtyard in the Kirani language, too complex for James's basic understanding, but the meaning was clear enough: he was issuing a challenge. "He demands trial by combat," Vena translated, her markings flashing with concern. "He claims you have no right to stand among us without proving your worth through ancient custom." Before James could respond, Cora stepped forward, her voice carrying power that seemed to make the very air vibrate. She spoke in their native tongue, her words causing gasps among the assembled warriors. "She invokes the law of the chosen," Naira explained. "By the ancient codes, you cannot be challenged until the bond is fully formed." This seemed to enrage Draken further. He drew his weapon, a blade that hummed with energy, and slashed it through the air in a gesture of defiance. "He says he will not bow to outsider corruption," Vena's voice was tight with anger. "He calls for others who wish to preserve our ways to stand with him." Several warriors moved to Draken's side, their weapons drawn. But others, including many of the warrior priests, stood their ground, forming a barrier between the traditionalists and the tower where James stood with his bonds. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid," James said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't want to cause a civil war in your society." The division was already there, Cora's voice was gentle but firm. "You are merely the catalyst that brings it to the surface. Change comes, whether we wish it or not." Naira placed a hand on James's shoulder, and he felt a surge of energy flow between them, one of the effects of their nascent bond. "You must learn our ways quickly," she said. "Not just for yourself, but for all of us. The heart of selection chose you for a reason." The next few hours were a blur of activity. James was taken to the Temple of Ancestors, where ancient knowledge was stored in crystals similar to the one that had chosen him. Venna began teaching him their combat techniques, which combined physical movement with the manipulation of their natural energy fields. Cora instructed him in their spiritual practices, helping him understand the deeper meanings behind their customs. But it was Naira who helped him most, explaining the complex political structure of their society. The Kirani had once been a spacefaring race, she told him, but had chosen to return to a simpler way of life while maintaining their advanced knowledge. The warrior women were not just fighters but leaders, scholars, and keepers of their people's future. "The bond between us is more than marriage as your people understand it," she explained as they walked through gardens where plants responded to their presence with waves of bioluminescence. "It is a sharing of strength, of purpose. When complete, we will be able to draw upon each other's abilities, share thoughts and feelings. And Draken fears this will dilute your culture," James said, beginning to understand. "He sees me as a threat to everything you've built here." "He sees change itself as a threat," Venna added, joining them in the garden. "But change is coming whether he wishes it or not. Our long isolation must end, the stars themselves tell us this." Their conversation was interrupted by a young warrior running toward them, her face marked with urgency. She spoke rapidly to Naira, whose expression darkened. "The Shadow Clan approaches," she translated for James. "They have heard of your arrival and demand to witness the bond completion ceremony." "The Shadow Clan?" James asked, noting how both warriors had tensed at the name. "Our ancient rivals," Venna explained. "They broke away from our people generations ago, choosing to embrace the darker aspects of our powers. They believe the prophecies speak of their ascendance, not our renewal." Night was falling now, the jungle around Luminera coming alive with natural light. From their vantage point, James could see torches approaching through the trees, the Shadow Clan delegation. Above them, storm clouds were gathering, and the air crackled with more than just natural electricity. "So what happens now?" James asked, watching the approaching lights. Cora appeared beside them, her mystic's robes swirling with enhanced luminescence. "Now," she said, "we prepare for war." The approaching torches multiplied, until they looked like a river of fire flowing through the jungle. Thunder rolled overhead, and James felt the crystal he still carried pulse in response. Whatever was coming, he knew their lives would never be the same after tonight. The Shadow Clan's arrival transformed the peaceful evening into a display of barely contained hostility. Their delegation emerged from the jungle like living shadows, their skin darker than the Kirani's, with patterns that pulsed in aggressive reds and purples. Their leader, a female warrior whose face was marked with ritual scars that glowed like molten metal, stepped forward. "Razara," Naira whispered to James. "The Shadow Clan's war queen." Razara's voice cut through the tense silence, speaking in perfectly accented English. "So this is the Starwalker who has stirred such chaos in our world." Her eyes, burning like embers, fixed on James. "The one who would fulfill the prophecy." "The heart of selection has chosen," Cora replied, stepping forward. The mystic's robes swirled with increased luminescence, responding to the mounting tension. "You have no authority here, Razara." "Don't I?" The War Queen's laugh was like breaking glass. "The prophecy belongs to all children of Zalara, not just your precious Luminera. Or have you forgotten the words? When the Starwalker bonds with the ancient power, the two paths will become one." James felt Naira and Venna move closer to him, their protective instincts heightened by the threatening presence. The crystal he carried pulsed stronger, resonating with their combined energy. Razara's eyes narrowed at the display. "Our interpretations differ," Venna said diplomatically, though her constellation markings flashed with warning patterns. The prophecy speaks of unity through peace, not conquest. Does it? Razara moved with liquid grace, circling their group. Then let us witness this peaceful unity. Perform the bond completion ceremony. Now. Under the watching eyes of both clans. Thunder cracked overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Each droplet seemed to catch the bioluminescence of the jungle, creating a curtain of living light around them. The gathered warriors of both clans formed a circle, weapons held ready but not drawn. Korra looked to the sky, then to James and his bonds. The storms come. Perhaps this is the will of the ancestors. She raised her voice to address both clans. The ceremony will begin at midnight, in the Temple of Unity. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. James was taken to ancient chambers deep within the Crystal City, where Kirani attendants painted his skin with temporary markings that mimicked their own luminescent patterns. Naira, Vena, and Korra underwent their own preparations, emerging in ceremonial armor that seemed to be made of living light. The ceremony will create a permanent bond, Korra explained as they waited for midnight. Our strengths will become yours, and yours ours. But more importantly, our minds and spirits will be linked. There can be no secrets between bonded ones. And if it fails? James asked, watching as more warriors from both clans filled the temple's vast chamber. It won't, Naira said with quiet confidence, touching the crystal he carried. The heart of selection never chooses wrongly. That's what Draken and his traditionalists don't understand. Change comes not to destroy us, but to help us evolve. The ceremony began as the twin moons reached their apex. The Temple of Unity lived up to its name, its crystal walls pulsed with patterns that matched the markings of all present, Luminara and ShadowClan alike. James stood with his three bonds in the center of a complex pattern carved into the floor, the heart of selection floating between them. Korra began the ritual, her voice carrying power that made the very air vibrate. The crystal responded, its light intensifying until it was almost blinding. James felt energy flowing between him and his bonds, their thoughts and memories beginning to merge. Then everything went wrong. Draken's voice cut through the ceremony like a blade. This abomination must not be completed. He and his followers burst through the temple doors, weapons drawn. At the same moment, Razara's warriors moved into attack positions, their own weapons humming with deadly energy. Now, sister. Razara called out, and to everyone's shock, one of her warriors threw something at the heart of selection, a device that crackled with dark energy. Time seemed to slow. James saw the device arcing through the air, saw the horror on Korra's face as she recognized what it would do. Without thinking, he reached out and caught it, feeling its dark energy try to corrupt the crystal's pure light. But something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying the heart of selection, the dark energy merged with it, creating a swirling vortex of power that connected James and his bonds more completely than any ceremony could have. Their minds linked fully, their combined strength flowing through the connection. The temple erupted into chaos. Draken's traditionalists clashed with Razara's warriors, while loyal Kirani fought to protect the ceremony. Through their new bond, James could feel Naira's tactical genius, Vena's strategic mind, and Korra's mystical understanding flowing into him. Together, they moved as one. Enough. James's voice carried the combined power of all four of them. The crystal's light expanded, filling the temple, forcing everyone to stop and shield their eyes. When it faded, all could see that James and his bonds were hovering above the floor, their combined patterns creating a display of power none had ever witnessed. The prophecy, Korra spoke through their shared consciousness, speaks not of one path consuming the other, but of both paths finding a new way forward. Together. The fighting stopped as warriors from both clans lowered their weapons, awed by the display. Even Draken stepped back, his face showing the first signs of understanding. Razara's expression was unreadable, but her warriors knelt, recognizing power greater than their own. As the energy settled, James and his bonds returned to the ground. The bond was complete, stronger than any in living memory. But as the adrenaline faded, he realized this was just the beginning. They had prevented one crisis, but the real challenges, uniting the clans, protecting their world, and dealing with the inevitable arrival of Earth forces, still lay ahead. Through their bond, he felt his mate's determination and support. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days following the bond completion ceremony brought unexpected changes to Luminara. Through their shared connection, James could feel the subtle shifts in the city's energy as traditional barriers between the clans began to break down. Warriors who had been enemies for generations now trained together, sharing techniques that had been closely guarded secrets for centuries. But not everyone embraced the change. Draken had disappeared into the jungle with his most loyal followers, and through their enhanced connection to the city's energy field, James and his bonds could sense dark purpose in their departure. Razara, too, had withdrawn her people to their shadow temples, though she left behind observers who watched everything with burning eyes. "They're waiting," Naira said one morning, standing with James on their crystal balcony. Through their bond, he could feel her strategic mind working through possibilities. Both sides believe the prophecy is still unfolding. "Let them wait," Vena appeared, her constellation markings pulsing with determination. "We grow stronger every day." The combined knowledge of both clans flows through the warrior priests now. Old wounds begin to heal. James was about to respond and a familiar sensation prickled at the edge of his consciousness. Through their bond, he felt Korra's alarm before she physically arrived, her mystic's robes swirling with urgent patterns. "The ancestors speak," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Earth vessels approach." James's heart sank. He had known this was coming. The Earth Defense Force would have tracked his quantum drive signature, even across unknown space. But he had hoped for more time. "How many?" he asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. 3 capital ships, Korra's eyes unfocused as she read the energy patterns. "They will reach orbit within 2 planetary cycles." Through their bond, James shared everything he knew about Earth's military capabilities with his mates. The EDF ships would be heavily armed, carrying enough firepower to level cities. They would come under the banner of rescue and exploration, but their true purpose would be to secure any advanced technology they found. "They cannot be allowed to discover our temples," Vena's markings flashed with tactical calculations. "The crystal's power, in the wrong hands." She was interrupted by a massive explosion that rocked the jungle's edge. Warning crystals throughout Luminara flared to life as warrior priests rushed to battle stations. Through their enhanced senses, James and his bonds could feel the approach of Draken's forces, now armed with weapons that pulsed with corrupted crystal energy. "He raids the ancient armories," Naira's voice was cold with fury. "Those weapons were sealed away for good reason." Another explosion lit up the pre-dawn sky, and this time James felt the impact through their connection to the city's energy field. Draken wasn't just attacking, he was targeting the crystal matrices that powered Luminara's defensive systems. "He thinks to force our hand before the Earth ships arrive," Korra said, her mystic senses probing the chaos. "If we're weakened by internal strife, we'll be easier prey," James finished. He could feel the truth of it through their bond. "He's willing to destroy everything to prevent change." As if in answer to his words, dark shapes emerged from the jungle canopy, assault platforms powered by the stolen crystal technology. Draken stood on the lead platform, his armor now inscribed with corrupted versions of the sacred patterns. Behind him, renegade warriors from both clans stood ready for battle, their weapons humming with deadly purpose. "Luminara falls today." Draken's voice boomed across the city. The outsider's influence ends now. But he had badly miscalculated. Even as his forces approached, James felt a new presence through their bond. Razara's warriors emerged from their shadow temples, but not to join Draken's assault. They formed a defensive line alongside the Luminara warriors, their combined energy signatures creating patterns of power that hadn't been seen since before the Great Schism. The prophecy speaks true, Razara's voice carried across the battlefield. Two paths become one, not through conquest, but through choice. The battle that followed would be spoken of for generations. Draken's corrupted weapons clashed with the combined might of Luminara and Shadow Clan warriors. The very air seemed to burn with crystal energy as ancient powers were unleashed on both sides. Through it all, James and his bonds moved as one entity, their shared strength allowing them to coordinate the defense. Naira's tactical brilliance, Vena's strategic insight, and Korra's mystical power flowed through their connection, allowing them to turn the tide at crucial moments. But the real turning point came when Draken, desperate and maddened by the corrupted crystal energy, tried to destroy the heart of selection itself. As he fought his way toward the temple that housed it, James felt a surge of power through their bond, not just from his mates, but from every warrior who had chosen to stand with them. The heart of selection pulsed with blinding light, and in that moment, James understood its true purpose. It wasn't just a tool for choosing mates, it was a key to unlocking the full potential of their combined strength. Through their bond, he shared this revelation with his mates, and together they reached out to touch the crystal's power. The energy that flowed through them was unlike anything they had experienced before, pure and uncorrupted. It spread through the city's crystal matrices, healing the damage done by Draken's weapons and showing everyone present a vision of what could be, two cultures not just coexisting, but evolving into something greater than either had been alone. Draken's forces, seeing their leader consumed by the very power he had tried to corrupt, laid down their weapons. The battle was over, but James knew their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The Earth ships were coming, and with them, a threat to everything they had built here. But as he stood with his bonds, feeling their combined strength and the support of both clans, he knew they would find a way. They had to. The future of two worlds depended on it. The Earth Defense Force ships appeared in Zalara's sky like artificial stars, their massive hulls reflecting the light of the twin suns. Through the enhanced perception granted by his bond, James could sense the tension rippling through both Luminara and Shadow Clan warriors as they watched the vessels take up orbital positions. "They're scanning us," he told his bonds, recognizing the familiar energy patterns. "Looking for defense systems, technology signatures, anything they can use to assess our capabilities." "Let them look," Naira's voice carried quiet confidence. Her tactical mind was already adapting Earth military protocols James had shared through their bond into strategies that would work with Kirani abilities. "They will see what we choose to show them." The combined forces of both clans had spent the last planetary cycle preparing for this moment. The most sacred temples had been hidden behind veils of crystal energy, their power signatures masked by techniques the Shadow Clan had perfected over generations. Warriors stood ready but unseen, their armor adjusted to blend perfectly with the living city. "They're launching shuttles," Vena reported, her constellation markings pulsing with incoming data from their sensor crystals. 3 landing craft, heavily armed but trying to appear diplomatic. "As we expected," Korra added, her mystic senses probing the approaching vessels. "They carry weapons we've never seen, but their minds." She paused, her expression troubled. "Their minds speak of conquest dressed as rescue." James felt the truth of her words through their bond. He knew Earth's standard first contact protocols, he had been trained in them, but he also knew how those protocols could be twisted by those seeking power. The EDF would come offering friendship while looking for any advantage they could find. The shuttles descended through the atmosphere in a perfect formation, touching down in the clearing James had originally crashed in. His destroyed vessel had been cleared away, leaving no trace of his arrival. As the shuttle doors opened, James and his bonds watched from their hidden position in the Crystal City. Admiral Helena Reeves stepped out first, her uniform pristine despite the planet's humid air. Behind her came a mix of diplomatic staff and heavily armed Marines, all trying to look non-threatening while staying ready for action. James recognized the formation, it was standard EDF procedure for potentially hostile first contact situations. "This is Admiral Helena Reeves of the Earth Defense Force," her voice carried clearly across the clearing. "We come in peace, seeking one of our own who may have crashed on your world." Through their bond, James could feel his mate's amusement at the formal declaration. They had prepared their own response carefully, one that would demonstrate both their power and their desire for genuine peace. The clearing's air began to shimmer with crystal energy. Patterns of light danced through the space between the earth forces and the jungle's edge, coalescing into the form of Korra. As the mystic's projection took shape, the Marines raised their weapons, only to find they no longer functioned. "We welcome you, travelers from Earth," Korra's projection spoke in perfect English, her form radiating calm authority. "Your lost one is safe, having found his place among us. But we sense your coming brings both opportunity and danger." Admiral Reeves stepped forward, hiding her surprise well. "We're pleased to hear of his safety. We request to see him, and to establish diplomatic relations between our peoples." "Of course," Korra's projection smiled. "But first, you must understand what you have entered." At her words, the clearing's entire perimeter lit up with crystal energy. Hidden warriors became visible, their armor glowing with power that the Earth sensors couldn't comprehend. The crystal city itself seemed to emerge from the jungle, its towers reaching impossibly high into the sky. James chose that moment to appear with Naira and Vena, their combined energy signature making it clear that he was now part of something far beyond Earth's understanding. Through their bond, he could feel the Admiral's shock at seeing him transformed, his skin now bearing the same luminescent patterns as his mate's. "Admiral," he greeted his former superior. "What you see is only a fraction of what exists here. The Kirani have powers and technology that Earth science can barely comprehend, but they have chosen to live in harmony with their world rather than dominate it." "Flight Lieutenant Harrison," Reeves replied, her voice carefully neutral. "You seem changed." "I am," he acknowledged. "I've been bonded into their society, chosen by their most sacred artifacts. And I stand with them now to offer Earth a choice." Through their connection, his bonds fed him strength as he continued. "You can either attempt to take this world by force, in which case you'll find your weapons useless and your ships unable to leave orbit, or you can accept a genuine offer of friendship and cultural exchange." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening Earth, Lieutenant?" "No," Naira stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "We offer you something far more valuable than weapons or technology. We offer you wisdom. The knowledge of how to advance without destroying yourselves. The understanding of powers your sciences have only dreamed of." "But only," Vena added, her constellation markings pulsing with emphasis, "if you come as true allies, not conquerors in disguise." The clearing fell silent as Admiral Reeves considered their words. James could sense her weighing options, calculating risks and potential benefits. Finally, she spoke. "You understand I'll need to communicate this to Earth Command." "Of course," Korra's projection nodded. "But know that we speak truth. We have no desire for conflict, but we will protect our way of life. The choice of path is yours." What followed were days of intense negotiations, with James and his bonds serving as bridges between two vastly different cultures. The Earth ships remained in orbit, but their weapons stayed powered down as diplomatic talks proceeded. Gradually, understanding began to grow. Earth scientists were allowed to study non-military applications of crystal technology, while Kirani mystics shared ancient wisdom about energy manipulation and consciousness expansion. Warriors from both clans demonstrated their abilities, showing that true power came from harmony rather than dominance. The prophecy, it seemed, had spoken of an even greater unity than anyone had imagined. James and his bonds had not just united the clans, they had opened the door to a new era of human-Kirani cooperation that would change both civilizations forever. As the twin suns set on another day of successful negotiations, James stood with his bonds in their crystal tower, watching Earth diplomats and Kirani warriors share a meal together below. "You know this is just the beginning," he said, feeling their combined thoughts flow through their bond. "There will be challenges ahead." "There will always be challenges," Naira replied, taking his hand. But we face them together now. Two paths become one, Korra added, her mystic's robes swirling with contentment. Just as the ancestors foresaw. And we'll be ready for whatever comes next, Vena concluded, her constellation markings pulsing with confidence. Through their bond, they all felt the truth of it. Their story had begun with a crash landing and an accidental ritual, but it had grown into something far greater, a bridge between worlds, a fulfillment of prophecy, and a love that transcended the boundaries of species and space itself. The future was uncertain, but they would face it as one, their combined strength lighting the way forward for both their peoples.